Thank you, everyone, for coming to our One Museum, One Book Club. Today we are discussing the prison letters of Nelson Mandela, and our moderator for this evening will be Dina Kaplan. Let me tell you a little bit about Dina. Dina is South African who left South Africa in her 20s and moved to Israel for 25 years, and now she lives in Chicago. She's an educator, teaching by the use of arts and puppetry to address culturally sensitive topics. She's been facilitating workshops for the past 30 years over 5 continents. She co-founded Puppeteers Without Borders in 2005 and has given workshops in schools, peace centers, and healthcare settings. She studied art in South Africa, puppetry at the School of Visual Theater in Jerusalem, and drama therapy at Tel Hai College in Israel. We are thrilled to have Dina as a collaborator as we've gotten ready for this exhibition. So thank you, Dina, for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
I want to introduce my colleague, Michelle Gatesy, too. She will be here with me helping support Dina. And many of you have been to our One Museum, One Book clubs before, but I just want to go over the ground rules or how it works, not really rules. We use the raise the hand function on the bottom bar. We use the chat, and we also use the physically raise your hand during our book club. And so Michelle and I will be helping Dina, suggesting to her that someone has a question, because we can't see everyone. So we might say, oh, so-and-so has a question, and do you want to ask it? Or if someone chooses to put their comment in the chat, we would read it and say, oh, Cecilia mentioned in the chat the following. Does anyone want to comment? So Michelle and I will be helping Dina in making sure everyone that wants to make a comment gets heard. If there are no questions about how we work and how we run these sessions, I'm going to hand it over to Dina to get us going.
Okay, hi. I actually can't see everyone on the screen. Is that usual?
Yeah, many people choose not to put on their video.
Okay, all right. So let's begin. This is a record of 255 letters written by Nelson Mandela while in prison under the apartheid regime. And these letters are filled with anguish and describing the oppression and the violation of the human rights and the deep degradation and censorship. And yet he kept his moral high ground. What emotions come up for you about that? He kept his moral high ground, and he kept his respect and courteousness to everyone. Does anyone have any thoughts about it that they could put in the chat? Any ideas? He was, yeah.
You can raise your hand, or you can use the participants, raise the hand in the bottom bar, or put it in the chat. So Michelle Becker has said that it probably helped him to have hope.
Definitely, no question about it. I mean, he was he was an attorney, he was an ANC activist, he was a father of 5, he was a husband, he was a son, and yet he managed to have hope. He managed to somehow write all these letters to reach out to people from all walks of life, like fellow activists, friends. What do we think of this means of the letter writing as a way to survive?
Dina, we have some comments related to your last question, I think, so maybe I'll just read them. Judy Scher said he decided not to give up the moral ground, no matter what. And Dina Krauss said he was an honorable person with everyone. I think so. who he is was coming through in a very strong way amongst these letters. And then Maurice said, he stayed involved on a personal level with extended friends and family. So with that, I'll turn it back to you and your most recent question.
Yes, he did. He stayed, he kept his humanity and integrity, as Deborah says. That was his cornerstone, really, when faced with the degradation of sleeping on the floor in the prison, for like 13 years, he slept with 3 little blankets, and he suffered terribly. And it was very painful to read how he tried using all his skills as an attorney to try and get justice and to get the right to be treated like a human being. I mean, that seems that he kept his humanity and integrity right. And what emotions came up while reading this book? Like, what did people feel about this man? Who is this man?
I can start us off. Determination. He's a man with a strong moral compass and determination to make a difference.
No question about it. Very, very determined, and also anti-racist, wanting to make a better South Africa, wanting to get a democratic South Africa.
Anyone else?
What kind of man? A man of strength.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Cecilia, I see a hand up. We can physically raise our hand too if you would like to
don't know
participate.
I don't know where the thing is. He tried to keep his humanity. He tried to make a decision that he's going to be his best to keep his humanity. And by keeping his own humanity, whoever he wrote the letters to, he extended his humanity to the other people.
Yes. Yes.
Judy notes in the chat that he was a man of strength and had ideals he would not give up on.
He would not give up on his ideals. That's absolutely true.
If anyone wants to participate by just raising your hand, please turn on your video. We're happy to have our conversation flow that way as well.
He didn't even know if his letters were reaching other people, the people that he was writing to. And yet he kept on writing these letters. What do you think of that?
He suspects that they're not getting them because he keeps copies. Why does he keep copies of his letters? He knows someplace in his mind that they're not getting them. Or maybe he has an opportunity to reread them and can role play. Oh, I know what she's going to say when she reads my letter. There has to be some kind of mechanism going on. I haven't finished all of his letters, but there has to be a mechanism that he uses to keep himself together, other than hope, and he's a God-fearing and he grew up, but there has to be some kind of activity that's going on in that cell that keeps his balance, and maybe keeping the copies of the letters. He kind of knows. I mean, imagine having a child and you can't see him till he's 16. It's so in your mind, you can write letters, but I know what he's doing now that he's 4. I know what he's doing now when he's 6. Now, maybe I'm adding a whole thing of maybe what I would try to do, but he's certainly a unique person. It's almost like I have never read much about him other than, headlines. But there are certain people who come through our lives that are unique. Gandhi comes to mind, and Martin Luther King comes to mind, and people like that. And he's a man who is thrust into a situation, and the situation and the man kind of come together. You wonder.
Thank you. That
Wow.
is true.
Yeah.
Dina, I noticed Dina Kraus had a hand up.
Well, he was just, he kept to his values, and he wanted to be able to make sure that his ideals continued to go forward. And it's so hard to do when you're not getting responses, you're not knowing what's happening, you're stuck in a box. And the frustration he must have felt was phenomenal. You know, that's it.
A phenomenal frustration, and he was an attorney and he had attention to details. Did
But
you
didn't
notice
he,
that?
didn't he want to finish his get his JD?
And he wrote to the prison authorities to give him the books so that he could study.
Yeah.
And he wanted to be treated like a human being, to be given what he could to know that in order to further himself, even from that cell.
And he knows other political prisoners have been treated differently. Going back to 1914 or 15, I maybe get the Boer War.
You're breaking up. Just say that again.
Sympathetic to Germany were put into prison, but also were not treated the way he was treated. He's Black. He's
Right. Right.
Oh, we have
Yeah,
an interesting comment from
was-
Michelle Becker, who said that, Michelle, chime in if I'm getting this wrong, but that the letters were a way for him, Mandela, to process his own thoughts and feelings.
Yes, I would agree with it. What he tried to do was, like Deborah says, he was trying to keep connected. He was forming attachments. His attachment was essential to keep connected to the world so that he would remain relevant. He was enraged that they censored his letters. He didn't even know if they were getting out, but he was enraged and bitter about it, but he still kept on writing, which is a strength, the strength that he had to just continue in the face of a lack of hope. So he wanted the connection, but what other themes could we look at that are related to the themes? I was thinking of one of the themes would be about the sense of justice, that he wanted things, he was an attorney and he wanted justice. Anyone else have thoughts about that? Kept his
There's
sanity.
a couple of comments before we move on to that. Someone said it was to keep his sanity and let others know he was okay if they got his letters. I think, as we discussed, the if is the big thing, but just by writing them, it allowed him to keep his sanity. And then another thing to kind of parking lot for a moment after this question, Dina, is someone wrote, or Dina Kraus wrote, I don't understand the hierarchy, or I didn't understand the hierarchy in the island prison, that he was showing the world the way he was being treated. That might be an interesting conversation. But back to you, to your question. The chat's a little slower.
That's okay. I mean, I think it's all connected to that he needed to reach out to the world because he was so isolated. He wanted to remain relevant, and kept to keep his sanity for sure. But he didn't know if they were getting his letters, and he was very, very specific about how he wanted these letters. He had these different roles. He was a father, and he was not only a father, but he was a son. and he was a husband. And each of these roles he wanted to address in detail. You know, he wanted to reach them and deal with the rent and deal with who would look after the children. And imagine the agony of not, you know, both parents are in prison and he can't do anything. And yet he keeps on writing and he attends to all these details. I mean, makes you wonder.
I'll get us going, but I want the group here. I think it's remarkable that he didn't kind of just give up on any of these roles. He remained a husband, he remained a father, he was checking in on grades, he was giving encouragement, he was sending love, he was mourning his mother. I mean, he was completely isolated, yet he was able to keep this motivation to pursue and maintain these relationships. And I find that admirable and actually amazing. So would others like to react to his efforts to maintain these relationships? Maurice?
I would just like to say something. You know, we're taking these letters, I wouldn't say out of context, but one has to look at what his life was like prior to, I guess, 60, before he goes to prison, and how it prepared him. So I wonder if somebody would talk about, you know, how he's raised, how it prepares him, how he's an activist, and before he goes to prison. So he doesn't, we're looking at these letters as him in prison, and that's fine, but what was he like before he went in? And therefore, it to a certain extent, explains his use of the letters and his personality.
Yes, I mean, he was already a leader, not only an attorney, but he was already a leader of the ANC, the African National Congress. So he was already functioning as a leader in the community, and people were turning to him to guide them. You know, so I think that when the ANC went, you know, violent and militant, and he had to support all these people, and so he had a real connection to the community, to the people on the street, to the system. I mean, he studied also like the Afrikaner and the language, and he was knowledgeable. He was a very educated man. I mean, he spent a lot of time studying.
And I mean, I also think he knew there was a strong possibility he would go to prison. I mean, he was put on trial. The trial they wasn't acquitted, but there wasn't enough evidence to convict. He went underground. He traveled with false identity. You know, as he was an activist, he took precautions against being arrested, and he probably knew that there was a high probability he would end up in prison, which I think, Maurice, to your point, maybe helped him prepare for that. Dina, would you agree with that?
I think that he was a revolutionary, and he was prepared to take it on and be committed and he knew the consequence of what that meant was that his family would suffer. But yet he took that on as a revolutionary. He was fighting for his ideals, and the oppression was so great, and he was not prepared to stop. He knew that. I mean, when the Rivonia trials came, he could have easily. I mean, they could have given him the death sentence then, and he knew that. But he still that was his struggle. Yes, I'll read you a little part here. He says here, I mean, this is his optimism. He says, I feel my heart pumping hope steadily to every part of my body, warming my blood and pepping my spirits. I'm convinced that floods of personal disaster can never drown a determined revolutionary, nor can the cumulus of misery that accompanies tragedy suffocate him. To a freedom fighter, hope is what a life belt is to a swimmer, guarantee that one will keep afloat and free from danger. He's writing to his wife. He's trying to keep her afloat. He's trying to keep other people, give other people hope, even though he's in prison. What are people's thoughts about that? You're giving other people hope when you are in a situation of terrible despair. That's what he did.
How were people able to do that?
How are people? I don't know why he did not get the death penalty. I think it was, I think they wanted to punish him. I think the prison system wanted to punish him. The government regarded the prison not as an institution of rehabilitation, but as an instrument of retribution. You know, that to punish and cripple them. I think there was some part of that cruelty that was there, this brutality. What you know, I think this is part of, I mean, I grew up in South Africa under apartheid, and even as a white person, you know, I would say that I was afraid. So I can only imagine how it must have been for people of color.
What were you afraid of?
I would have nightmares about the police. We would see people being taken away. There was always a question. There was people that were.
Was it only Black people? I think you're frozen, Dina.
So, Dean, I'll jump in. Oh, Dina, Dina's frozen. So, apartheid law divided the South African community into 4 groups. Can you guys hear me?
Mhm.
Okay. And Dina Kaplan, please jump in. This is from my studying for the exhibition. So let me see if I'm getting it right. There were whites, there were Blacks, which the whites are about 15%, the Blacks are about 80%. And then there was colored, which was mixed race. And then there was Asian. And the whites were at the top and the Blacks at the bottom, and the Asian, Islanders, and colored were at levels in between. But the very small white majority created the laws that were designed to keep the 80% majority as subservient labor in their place, uneducated, not able to make strides in their own country. Did I get it right, Dina?
You totally. I mean, it was an oppressive regime that anybody who tried to go against it was oppressed. There was no place, there was censorship. We didn't even get to hear about things because everything was censored. So we didn't know about things. Only when I left South Africa did I really learn about what had happened in this country that I'd grown up. And it's shocking to say that.
I want to circle back to this whole idea of why didn't he get the death penalty? And there's 2 people here, Deborah and Maurice, both wondering if the apartheid government didn't want to make him a martyr. You know, what kind of revolution would have been sparked if Mandela had gotten the death sentence? Go ahead, Cecilia.
Well, what happens in most of the regimes is that he was too known of a figure outside of South Africa. Therefore, it would have only been a proof of what apartheid means if they would kill him or sentence him to death or whatever. They tried to protect the regime from the outside world by saying we are not so terrible, we are not so horrible. And that is very common to any of the atrocity regimes, very common. I mean, they will not in general touch somebody who has a profile that is known in the outside world as somebody really well known and recognizable. So I think that that's one of the reasons.
It's true, and it's exactly right. And even there were people watching. There was Amnesty International was watching. There were people, human rights organizations that would come to the trials and be there. And then he would send them thank you letters. He acknowledged it, that there were people watching, and he knew that this was history. You know, there needed to be a record, and there needed to be people watching, and he counted on that, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. But that happened in many other regimes also. The more visible and known outside of the then the most known in the outside world, in some way they were more protected.
Right.
So at least protected from death or protected from atrocities worse than what they were committed towards him. But I also think, if I may answer one more thing, is that he had a mission. And that mission is what gave him a lot of strength.
Yeah.
Because the mission was not just what he wants to accomplish, but the mission is also how his idea or his silence or him being imprisoned is going to give a message and power, or at least the will to do something to most of the people outside, most of the people that are oppressed.
So I think what I hear you saying is that he had purpose by being in prison because he could turn that experience and know that it was motivating others to carry on his quest for a democratic South Africa.
Not that he wanted to be in prison, but he utilized his time in prison as a message to do that.
Yes, and he, I think that was why the letters were so important, you know, for him. And that's why he was trying to reach all these different communities, even, you know, the Minister of Justice he was trying to establish bonds that were not so easy to, he did not want to be ignored, you know, and yeah, I mean, I think this is the big question is, the big thing is that he actually managed to, that people saved these letters, that there is a record, and he knew it. He wanted witnesses. I would think that's why he did it. He wanted witnesses also to everything that was happening. He wanted people to know how he was suffering, and he wanted to acknowledge other people's suffering and be determining their fate to change the course of history. Yeah.
Well, as a lawyer, he probably understood that the letters are the evidence. He is writing evidence that eventually might be found and might be heard, and therefore the outside people will know it.
Yes, no question about it. He actually wanted to make sure that this would not, he was a human being, and he needed to be recognized as one, and he fought for it. He fought for that. You know, what better, I mean, he's also fighting to see his wife. You know, he's fighting to see his children. I mean, his mother died. They didn't let him go to the funeral. You know, that was inhumane, and he fought it. He still wanted the record and wrote the letters. I mean, that is honorable, wouldn't you say?
He tried to keep his humanity. Isn't it also interesting that once he was out of jail, he had no will for revenge? And that is a very altruistic, very, very difficult thing.
Because he said that if he would remain bitter, he would be remaining in jail. That would keep him in jail, and he didn't want to do that. Dina, I can't hear. Oh, I thought Dina said something.
That's great. That I can see it's like carrying like the Holocaust survivors. They carry so much with them, and many of them cannot get out of their past. Carrying his guilt, his prison with him. I can see that. That's fabulous.
Right.
I think it's interesting. One reason maybe that allowed this is this feeling of mission that we talked about earlier, right? There is work to be done to create a democratic state. I did that work while I was in prison. I'm doing that work now that I am out. If I look back and get angry and mad and pissed off about the time I spent, that's energy that I'm not spending moving forward to create a democracy. So it could be one of the things that allowed him to do that was just that single-minded mission. Does anyone have other thoughts on what may have allowed him to not feel anger?
I also read about reconciliation, that the reconciliation was one of his main goals. Now you have to be extremely altruist and selfless in order to bring up reconciliation in this situation or in anyone. Can you expand a little bit more on reconciliation?
Well,
the Truth and Reconciliation Committees came later. I mean, there was the struggle, and there was the struggle, then there was the vote, you know, getting the vote. And then that period came much later where there had to be accountability. And I don't know, it's not an area of expertise of mine, the Truth and Reconciliation Committees. I don't know if you are dealing with that in the exhibition, Marcy?
we are. I mean, a lot of that happened in the 90s.
Right.
You think about the apartheid laws started in the 40s. So, you know, we're talking close to 50 years later before we get to reconciliation. But, you know, it was a movement to compensate for pain and suffering. That's my knowledge, which is pretty superficial at this point.
It was also understanding that only with forgiveness could the country heal. That there had to be the forgiveness, and and people wanted to speak out and say, they wanted the perpetrators to hear what they had done. They wanted the world to know. It was also part of this accountability, which I think in every country you want, would be an ideal thing to have a Truth and Reconciliation Committee. Wouldn't you think?
Well, I think that he had a certain series of goals, and in order to accomplish, for example, to bring down the institutionalized apartheid down, he needed to go through different stages. And I think that one of the stages, in order to bring that in an institutionalized manner, was the reconciliation stage.
Right. Well, yeah, as Marcy said, it was later, and it's a very important stage.
We've seen people like Viktor Frankl talk about how do you go on, because you have to have a purpose to go on. If you dwell on what's happened, you know, you can't keep going. Why did this happen? You have to go on to how do I deal with what's happened to me? Kaur, I forgot her first name, who is, one of our people in our hologram, had a movie called Forgiving Mengele. And she and her sister. And you wonder, how can anybody forgive Mengele? And she lectures on, as long as you're a victim, you can't move on. And she talks to women's groups in particular who've been abused. So it extends to other areas as well, that as long as you dwell on this, you can't take what's happened to you and turn it to your ultimate purpose and vision.
Maurice, I think it's interesting that agree 100% Mandela, Eva Kor, Viktor Frankl, but the people that are able to do that and talk about it are people that we know their names, because it talks to how difficult it is.
How unique they are.
Yeah.
And it's also individual. You can't do it as a group. The forgiveness has to be done as an individual.
Any other thoughts on forgiveness or lack of anger or mission or vision or guiding principles? I think it's an interesting concept.
And it's also interesting how his dignity inspired people. That it inspired people. His dignity wanted other people to, they also wanted the dignity. There was something in that dignity that he had that inspired it in others. Let's see what Lisa A says. The Truth and Reconciliation Committee also helped educate the white South Africans on the atrocities of the government. To Dina's point, white South Africans did not know much of what occurred. It's hard for me looking back and feeling guilty for what happened. And why did my parents not say anything? Nelson Mandela went into prison when I was 4. I mean, he was there for 27 years. He came out in his 70s. In the whole period that I lived in South Africa, I only was aware of maybe of the last 5 years that I lived there. I left there at 21. So how they managed to suppress the news, do you think that that's going on here? Do you think that that's happening in other places? What can we learn from this? The suppression of the censorship. Does anyone have any feelings about the censorship that went on, or any connections to it? Deborah?
Oh, yeah, Deborah's hand is up. Deborah L., you need to unmute.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I think what we have today is a glutton of information. It's not all true. So people today have to sort their misinformation or disinformation. You can find, and the nuances. I just think we're only censored in, like, we censor ourselves because we want to look to find the news that we agree with, I think. So I'm saying a couple things. One is that we're so divided that I think there's certain censorship in maybe that only one viewpoint is presented, but you can find it. So you know what I'm saying a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so our job is to find the truth. I don't know. I'm kind of like thinking.
I mean, it's the thing about his moral high ground was that you look at a man who's a leader like that and you believe in him because he inspires in us something because of his value system, that you can follow him. I think that was what South Africans believed in him. He was a man of integrity, and so all the suffering that he had before and the censorship and the oppression before. You know, I mean, is there censorship here the same way? No, not in the same way.
No.
Marcy says, did South Africa have a free media? Did the population believe they were getting the truth? People, it's hard for me to say. I know that people felt that they were not getting the truth. But again, there are different populations and different groups. The Afrikaners might feel one thing. Yes, Cecilia. Yeah.
No, I'll wait till you finish.
No, it's okay. I mean, I wanted
I
to hear
think
what
that
you
the
were saying.
common thing in regimes that are not democratic, I mean, we have seen, and even today many, is that they control the press in a very tight way. In democratic societies, you might believe what you want, but you do have, like you said, access to different sides of the story. Even if the story is distorted, you do have access. What happens, like in the apartheid or in other dictatorships, the atrocities, etc., is that you do not, people do not have, so their reality is based only on what is given to them or what it's allowed for them to have access to.
That's right. That's
That is
why
very important.
Yes, exactly. And that is why they did not allow the newspapers into the jails, into the prisons.
Right.
Because they knew that if he knew what was going on, that was a powerful thing. Right?
Absolutely.
You know, knowledge like that is powerful. Then the people understand, then he would know what was happening. But when you don't know, you don't react because you don't know. Yes. Sorry. You have to unmute.
Okay. It's my perception growing up that I knew many people Jews who left South Africa.
Yes.
And since you might be somebody who can answer this, I wondered if it was a question of personal fear. Was there something unique about Jews in South Africa, or did other people, Italians, British, what have you, also leave? Would you just comment on Jews in South Africa during this period of time? How they responded? Did they leave in great numbers? I know several who left very good businesses behind at great financial hardship to them to come to the United States, and I imagine other places as well. Would you, for my information or others, could you comment?
I think I can really only talk from what I experienced in my family. And that is that my grandfather came from Riga and he built himself from nothing and he built up. And then when everything started to go, you know, bad, he didn't have anywhere to go. He didn't want to give up. Whereas I, as a 21-year-old, was like, I need to choose. Is my fight Israel or is my fight South Africa? And I chose Israel and I went to live in Israel. And then I learned a lot about South Africa. And then I went back when it happened to be that it was the week before Nelson Mandela was released. And so I was there for when he was released. And so that made it possible to be there. But I think some people it was untenable and they couldn't live with it. And other people chose that was what they had, you know, that's what the country, that they believed in the country and they put everything into it. Yes, Cecilia.
Well, I do have family, very close family, you know, that come from South Africa. And one of the things that was possible for them is, yes, they left. Like, for example, my daughter-in-law's father left when he was 20 or 25. But they would go back every summer to visit the family. So there wasn't a total break between the ones who stayed and the ones who left. They still had very close relationships. Therefore, it wasn't, at least from their experience, as hard to leave. because they knew that they can come and go and visit anytime they wanted to, at
Yeah,
least for a while.
yeah, you're right. You're right. And the Jewish community is very strong in South Africa.
Mhm.
It's a very tight, wonderful community. And you can go anywhere in the world and you'll go into a synagogue and you'll find a South African and they'll take you in a heartbeat, you know, which has happened to me many times when I was traveling. And it's just like the South African community is all over the world. They're spread far and wide,
Thank you.
unfortunately. Yeah. But my father was a Zionist and he was like, I want to be in Israel. You know, so that was the choice. And they were afraid. And even people who were like involved with Mandela, who were close friends that were on trial. There was, I think it was Brad Fisher. He was one of the people. He left with his wife to London and only returned like in 2014. When everything, you know, I mean, I don't know what's going on in South Africa today. I haven't been back in so many years. So it's a different South Africa, different probably to what Mandela imagined also. You know, as things change, as in Israel, it changes too.
You know, were there other themes in the book you wanted to discuss or pull out?
And the main themes was the one of like the moral high ground and the dignity and the fact that he was an optimist in spite of everything. He was enormously optimistic, and his sense of justice. I wanted to touch on that as an attorney. I felt that was a very big part of his life, being an attorney and how he dealt with things. Very systematic, wanting them to follow the laws. I don't know if anyone's an attorney here, but that's how he was, a man of detail. And so I wanted to talk about that, and then just the hope.
So do we have any attorneys with us that want to comment on that and how they viewed the letters, maybe from their perspective? We have a lot of listeners.
Well, it was a very difficult read because even though it was chronological and you could go back and forwards, it was painful. It caused me a lot of anguish to read it. It took me a long time. I don't know if anyone else had that experience. You did. A lot of detail.
Have had to put it down. I thought I could read through it in preparation for the exhibit, and I'm out of town, and so I thought, well, I'm doing my homework. But I have had to put the book down after about 200 pages and then pick it up again. It is not. It's not an easy book to read from cover to. It's not a page turner.
It's not a page turner, but you can really respond to the anguish, though, right? Of him as a father or a husband.
It's very painful, and there's no let up. Occasionally there's humor. You'll smile at some of his advice, to his children from afar, but there's no let up.
There's no let up. No.
I found the emphasis with his kids on school interesting. Yeah, your grades, I'm glad, stay with it. I mean, you could see his values through his letters, and that was one that came through very, very clearly.
Very much so.
Did any other values that came through?
I mean, just his sense of, wanting people to do the right thing, determined to be treated like a human being. One thing that I was looking at about hope, this was on page 110, was that he said about the communication. He said, as long as I still enjoy the privilege of communicating with you, this is to Winnie, even though it may exist in form for me, and until it is expressly taken away, the records will bear witness to the fact that I tried hard and earnestly to reach you by writing every month. He tried in earnest. I mean, I think that was he really gave, yeah. Any thoughts on that? Were there any letters that you felt that is particularly spoke to you? I mean, the one about his son died. That letter, I don't know if anyone else remembers that letter. You know, his son dies, and he writes to all these different family members processing this loss. Anyhow, that's
we have about 9 minutes left. So I didn't know if you wanted, how you wanted to wrap up our session. They seem to go so quickly every month. But do you have any thoughts for the last 5 minutes or so?
I think, you know, I've marked different places that I felt were, you know, this thing of his determination and his determination to create a new South Africa, and his perseverance, his determination, his will to fight oppression and to inspire others to fight oppression. I think that is the direction that we also here and everywhere need to get inspiration from, wouldn't you say? Is to fight any oppression and to fight racism. That would be my thought, my parting thought. Does anyone else have a parting thought? Ina?
I know. I've been listening very attentively to all the commentary. I have to admit I didn't read the book, but I would like to recommend to my fellow colleagues that look at some of the documentaries and the films that have been passed on to us on Amanda's email, and Wendy, who sent one about 2 weeks ago. When you see him and you see it live, you get a sense of who he really is. And I thought it was interesting that Maury brought up the fact of how to understand and using like heroes and people like Gandhi and we forgot to put in Lewis and Martin Luther King. These are people that have a special fabric of their caricature, that if we aren't those kind of people, it's very hard to understand them, because they all share what you've repeated and driven home so often, of the mission, of their determination, and they're willing to put themselves forward. And in Viktor Frankl's book, the word attitude, Maury, was what stood out. The attitude of a hero, or somebody who stands for a mission or a place that is so important in their lives and in other people's lives, is what the strength is that people have. Many of us feel we have strength, but we don't have the same kind of ability. And it's a very, but I do highly recommend watching some of those documentaries before we even go to the training. I'm curious to know, my mother-in-law was from South.
If you have any that you could copy into the chat, that would be great. Not everyone on this call.
Well,
those emails on this session. So
Marcy, there's, just tap on the ones. We just got a wonderful whole email of different resources from Amanda. We all got that email either yesterday or today. And then there was one on, I don't remember the titles. I just kept tapping them and watching them. So
right. My point is, not everyone in this session is a docent or is.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I apologize.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Can I just ask a question of Dina Kaplan,
Sure.
or is it too late? My mother-in-law was from Johannesburg, South Africa, and she's been gone for a long time. But in one of the films that I watched, or actually I watched something from an African British journalist also about Africa the other day. And the whites, who were the ones that ruled the roost, lived in a separate community. And most of them, I'm not pinpointing it, but most of the whites were wealthy. They were business people, they were whatever. And, I don't want to make a blanket general statement, but I'm curious to know, once you or your family moved on to Israel, I don't know if you went with your family or not, because you said you went when you were 21. Did you ever look back and talk about, because you've indicated that you really weren't aware when you were living in South Africa. Did you talk about it afterwards? And did the attitude, how did you think later?
I never stop processing it. It's an ongoing dialogue in my head and with other people, with other South Africans, with Jews, it's just a constant. There's so many themes with South Africans, and I'm always, thinking about it in some way or another. I mean, it's impossible not to. And I would just, like to end and say that when I look at a man like Nelson Mandela, with all his humility and with all his kindness, it just struck me, this kind man. Everybody who got in touch with him was a kind man, was affected by his kindness. And I'd sort of like to finish with that's what he brought to people too, just on a basic level.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Such a powerful way to finish. I think there's a t-shirt, the world, if everyone was kind, what a world this would be. So, simple and so relevant. I want to thank you for moderating. I want to thank everyone for coming. Michelle is going to paste into our chat a survey. We're going to ask if anyone would like to give us some feedback, to please fill that out.
Thank you very much.
And we invite you. There's so much, I think, to be learned. I think there were a lot of questions that didn't get answered. So I invite you to our virtual opening of Mandela Struggle for Freedom on Thursday. You can register for the program at our website under events. And then we'll be opening the exhibition to members February 19th and to the general public on the 20th. We are operating at 25% capacity. We have COVID safety protocols in place. Everyone is masked, one-way traffic flow. It feels very safe to me when I'm there. So I encourage you, when you're ready, when you have vaccine, when you feel safe, to visit the exhibition. It's Ariel and team are doing a phenomenal job, as they usually do. And then if you prefer virtual, we are having virtual group tours available. They are also under the events page on our website, and you can register there. And then if you want to visit with your friends, we are offering both virtual and in-person group tours. So lots of activity around Mandela. We have a full slate of programming that goes all the way through the fall when the exhibition leaves. So lots and lots of ways to learn more about what's going on in South Africa and Mandela's story. Our next book club is a fiction piece, so we're going to change it up a bit. It's called Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed, and we'll be discussing that book on March 16th. So with that, I want to thank everyone for coming, for Dina for moderating, for Michelle being backup in case internet went out or the crowd got too big, and have a great night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mercy.
Thank
Stay
you so
safe,
much.
everybody.